They all say that wouldn't it be great to have it all just work properly, but they would be bored to death with that. Once something has become culturized, once something has become part of your culture of your business, it's going to stay part of your culture for a long period of time. It has massive momentum. It's like this big sailing cruise ship. It takes a lot of energy to get it out of port.
Maui Mastermind presents the Business Coach Podcast, answering your questions and providing real actionable insights for building a better, stronger, more profitable business without sacrificing your time, life, or freedom anymore.
Well, welcome to the Business Coach. I'm your host, David Finkel, CEO of Maui Mastermind. In today's episode, I want to talk with you about the true cost of not staying the course. Specifically, what we're talking about here are the number of business owners that I've seen, many of whom we've coached, who, as the owner, they see a problem or they spot an opportunity in the company and they seize it or solve it. But once they get it, quote unquote, fixed, they then turn their attention onto other pressing matters, and the thing that they fixed, the solution that they put into place, falls apart. And we call this the fix and fade dilemma. And let me just go through what it looks like, if I may. And so you see this all the time. The business owner, he or she identifies a real problem or a big single opportunity. And so they come in there and they fix it, or they solve that opportunity or seize that opportunity. And they do a good job with that. Problem is that 30 days later, 90 days later, 6 months later, when it's solved, quote unquote, they take their attention and go focus on the next problem to solve. And this thing that they've solved starts to fade. And by fading here, I mean it becomes broken again. And then 3 months or a year later or 2 years later, they look back and say, crap, it's broken again. And so they fix it again. And of course, what happens is they turn their attention to the next problem to be fixed. And what they fixed fades again. And this fix, fade pattern happens quarter after quarter, year after year. And what it costs them as a business owner is they lose any real momentum and they get this ceiling. And I might have misspelled that. Smile with me if it is. I don't remember ceiling as C-E-I, but if I did get it wrong, I apologize. They hit the ceiling that they never seem to be able to grow by. For some companies, that ceiling is at $1 million per year of revenue. For others, it's at 5 million, 10 million, 25 million. But they hit that ceiling and they say to themselves, I've been stuck here for years. And I know this for a fact because so many of them, after repeated cycles of fix, fade, they're disheartened that a subset of them turn to us and say, hey, I'm finally ready to take outside coaching and a structured approach. And the way to blow through this, by the way, is what we do with clients. Let me just walk you through that. When you fix something, we think we're done. And as business owners, it's so common that we just want to solve problems. We crave the urgency of dealing with things that are fires to be put out. We don't admit that to ourselves, but our behaviors highlight it. It is absolutely true in my experience, and I've worked with tens of thousands of company owners over the last 30 years. And I see a high percentage of them really find the excitement from a business from being able to do multiple different things. Now, they all say that wouldn't it be great to have it all just work properly, but they would be bored to death with that. And that's a problem because now they take their attention from where it needs to be and they put it somewhere else. And when they think they fixed it, they put it somewhere else, but too soon. What they don't know is from the fix, they need to do something else. Once they've fixed it, that fix needs to be operationalized. And so that fix to be operationalized means that now we've solved it. We need to systematize it and process it out. We need to build out refined tools, spreadsheet tools, software tools, worksheets, scripts, collateral materials, and we need to train our staff so that they can use this operationalized system to keep the fix working. And we think, oh, we're done. And that's not enough. Because left alone, you will also fade from that operationalized solution. We need to do one more thing. we need to go from this operationalized solution to what we call inside the Maui community, we need to culturize it. I know it's probably not grammatically correct, but culturize, what that means is we need to make it part of how us as a company, how we see ourselves. Like, there's no other way to do this. Of course we follow this operationalized best practice to maintain this result. There's no other way to do that. And if I do this, what happens is once it becomes part of the culture, it happens automatically. Systems are good. Systems teach, systems direct, systems give a pathway. Culture shapes the behavior automatically. But we need to go from the fix to operationalize before we go to culturize. Why? Because we want a best practice, a reproducible, repeatable, systematic approach that we can then make that part of the culture. Now, usually the person who's really good at fixing is not really good at operationalize, nor are they really good at culturizing. So you as a company owner, and most of you who are watching The Business Coach tend to be business owners. Most of you have companies on the low end from $1 to $10 million a year in revenue. The biggest majority are probably somewhere between the $5 and $50 million a year revenue. And we have some outliers that are at the 250 or 500 million or even $1 billion or above, watching the program or listening to the podcast each week. Wonderful. I appreciate that very much. But the person who's good at the fix is not generally that person to operationalize and culturalize, which means you need not just you to know this, but your leadership and management teams need to understand that when we created this fix, now we can hand the baton to Joanne. Joanne, I've just solved this problem. You now have the baton. You own making sure that we process this out. You own making sure that we refine and simplify the tools that our team will use to get that result. And you also own training all the team members and making sure you're managing closely enough to ensure that over the next 6 to 12 months that the people really are using the operationalized solution to get the result that we want. And I'm asking for you to make sure that right now, on a monthly basis, you're checking in exactly how that's going. Later on, once we get that going for 6 or 12 months, I'm not needing you at that point to check in. At some point, I'll tell you that you now have it well enough that I just want you to check in with me about it if there's some variance from the performance side. But for now, for the next 6 months at least, I want a monthly update from you that just tells me how it's going and assures me that it's going well, or if it's not, what's not working and how you're dealing with it to fix it and improve it. By the way, that was a clean handoff. What you handed off, when you expect those things to happen, what does success look like, how you expect them to close the loop, clear ownership on the handoff, right? The passing of the baton. And at some point, you go from operationalize where you can put less attention on it, but you still need to keep enough attention to still keep it part of the culture. So what does it mean at this stage for culturize? What it looks like there is you need enough management attention at the operational stage that you're making sure the people doing the system, doing the process, are in fact consistent with that. You need enough leadership attention to hold the manager, the owner of that process, accountable on a bigger picture way. And then as we start to get to the culturize, we still need some attention, but it tends to be less. It tends to be less. And what that means is the moment I hand off the operationalize fixed, now what I can do is I can go on to fix the next problem. And when I go on to fix the next problem, knowing that I've left someone behind to own the operationalize portion of that, now once they've done that, I can now hand to somebody else the operationalize portion. And I can hand to somebody else or that same person the culturize. And what this does is it helps me blow through that ceiling that was trapping me or constraining me before. Now, a couple of key points of doing this in practice. First of all, the single biggest point failure in this process is somebody fixed something and then they think that once I've fixed it, I'm done. Once you've fixed it, you're only a third of the way through the solution. I've got to then make sure that I've got a clean owner who owns the systematization, the training, the putting in the internal controls of the KPIs or other ways to monitor that the people are using the process in the right way to get the right result at the right time. And then I've got to make sure that I have enough leadership attention over time to hold the manager accountable, who's holding the people accountable for that result. And if I do that, great. But the mistake is we turn our attention away and think we're done. No, we've just gotten a third of the way done. The good news is if I do it well and have reasonably good people, I can pass the baton and delegate the next piece. The second big mistake in this part is people build these elaborate, wonderful systems at the front end of the operationalize part, and then they think they're done. But they're not. You have to train people, and they say, David, I walked them through the system. I did that yesterday, and they're not doing it. Well, great. Did you make sure that you had enough management attention to see that they really knew what they were doing? And then to change their behaviors and their habits, you have to have enough management attention, typically fairly intensely, over the next 3 months, 6 months, sometimes even 12 months to break the old habits to get them using the new operationalized solution. And then finally, I need to still maintain some review of the internal controls and to make sure that fix, that operationalized fixed, is staying there long enough, because typically it takes 2 to 3 years for a new element to become part of the company culture, which you could say, Dave, that seems like an awful long time. It is. That's the downside. It takes a while. It takes time. On the plus side, it takes a long time for it to get broken after it's become operationalized. Once something has become part of culturized, once something has become part of your culture of your business, it's going to stay part of your culture for a long period of time. It has massive momentum. It's like this big sailing cruise ship. It takes a lot of energy to get it out of port. It takes a lot of energy to get it moving in the right direction. But once you do, you can turn off the engines and it's going to go and go and go and go before it stops, because it's got such momentum behind it. The same thing here with this process. Couple other tips that I think will be really useful for you, if I may. So when you think about this fix, operationalize, culturalize, which, by the way, inside of the Maui community, we talk about this as the FOC tool. It's one of the tools that our coaching clients use regularly. The key with this is generally the person who's best able to fix, which requires creativity and drive and initiative and a little bit of willingness to test and to experiment, is different from the person who's going to operationalize. The person who's going to operationalize tends to be more of a process-driven person. They tend to be more of requires reasonably strong and consistent management, a little bit more patience to help stay with it long enough to change people's behaviors. Oftentimes what an owner of the business who's good at fixing gets bored or tired of, or finds frustrating, or he gets impatient with. So it might not be the same person with that, but please remember I talked about a clean handoff to the next person from that. My final comment here is it requires, though, that there's still enough leadership attention so that you're holding whoever's managing this process accountable to make sure that operationalized fixed stays fixed. Now, let's give an example of how this all works. And I'm going to do it with one from my own company, right? I'm going to pull back the curtain and share with you something right now. So a couple years ago, what we found was we had a weird thing go on. Historically, when a new client joins our coaching program, the retention rate is really high, 90+% with that new client. But for something happened where that rate dropped into the 70% range. And when we noticed it, because our numbers showed it, we're like, what's going on? And what we discovered was that the way people were finding us had fundamentally shifted. A couple of our marketing strategies were working exceptionally well. And so people were finding us and joining us in the coaching program very quickly, where in the past they might have had 3 months or 6 months or more of background with our company. They might have been reading the e-letter that we do. They might have been reading my articles on Inc.com, the syndicated articles there with Inc. They might have been listening to the podcast. They might have been reading some of the books that we've written as a company, Scale, Build a Business, Not a Job, Grow Your Medical Practice, etc. And so by the time they came and joined the program, they had a real relationship with the Maui community before they even joined. But several years ago, we had the shift happen, and we were having people, which we still do today, who had learned about Maui 4 days ago and joining 4 days later. You know, the good news is, well, we can still work with them and give them a great result. But those people, when there was a inevitable disruption in the coaching process, coaching miscue on terms of the time, the coach set up a meeting with them at 10 a.m. Mountain, and the person thought they said 10 a.m. Eastern. And so they had one miscue. Well, the client didn't have the same relationship to go through that period. Plus, how we onboarded in the past was very fast. We got people immediately going with the coaching. There was no preliminary taking even 30 days to make sure we brought them up on a certain base of understanding about what's the model we're going to use to do this coaching work to scale your company to make it less owner dependent on you. What's the framework we're going to do on a quarterly process? How do we engage your team members so that they can do the bulk of the work with you, not just you doing all the work? Those are all things that we took for granted. And so when we spotted that, we had to go back and fix the situation. And we did. We completely redesigned the onboard process. Now from there, we had to operationalize that fix. That was a difficult thing to do. We had to change the behavior of all of our coaching staff and the operational team and the client support team behind there. We had to change tools and the automated sequences and the physical materials that we ship to clients. And to do that well, we needed to put internal controls in place. We had part of our staff was monitoring coaching calls with a rubric to make sure that they covered X, Y, and Z on the very first call. Did they do that well? 1 to 5, 1 to 5, 1 to 5. Giving feedback to the coaches. And we had to do that, which took us probably close to 9 to 12 months to operationalize that fix. And then from there, we turned it as part of the culture. It's become part of how we coach clients. By stepping up our game with how we onboarded a new client, the ultimate result from that part was now we're back up in the high 90s on the retention rate for new clients. But it was a really management and leadership intensive 2+ year period of time as we identified the problem, solved the problem, operationalized the solution, and then had to keep pushing for that operationalized solution to become part of the internal company culture. The same things are going to happen for you. So the big piece I'm saying here, the cost of not staying the course is you get trapped in a constrained business. That ceiling of fix, fade, fix, fade, fix, fade creates massive frustration. And it's almost impossible to sustainably get past that until you learn how to operationalize and culturalize the fixes that you make. So I hope that you liked today's episode of the Business Coach Podcast. I hope it gave you new ways of looking and thinking about it. I would strongly encourage you, get your leadership and management team, have them listen to this podcast, have them watch this podcast. Why? Because then you now have something that you can go back, have real discussion. How can you apply this fix, operationalize, and culturize in your company? Where have you been prey to the fix, fade, fix, fade, fix, fade cycle? And how has it limited you? And why now are you going to have a better way of building it? As always, if we can be of service to you to do this better or faster, this is just one of a number of different tools we've developed for companies. Typically, the companies we work with are in the $5 to $50 million per year revenue range when we begin working with them. We've had some clients that started bigger. We have some clients that started smaller. But generally, our niche is working with successful, profitable companies and helping them to effectively scale, building strategic depth along the way so that they truly are building a business, not just owning a job for themselves. So if we can be of help, please reach out to our team. And I look forward to seeing you in a future episode of The Business Coach.